If you're disappointed that I'm not in a jacket, you should have come to first hour. Because I was in a jacket, and then I got hot, and then my daughter got cold, and so now she's wearing my jacket. It's being put to good use. Well, good morning. My name is Terry Blakemore. My wife and I have had the privilege of serving and being a part of this church for 18 years. And it's been a blessing and a challenge and all the things that you would expect a church to have. But we're privileged to be here, and I'm privileged to just step in for Pastor Scott this morning as he's away on a graduation trip for his son, and then next week is a graduation trip out to a TES graduation in Florida. So you'll have my father next week. But I want to extend this morning a very warm welcome to all of the ladies and a heartfelt thanks to you in this happy celebration, this day of Mother's Day. It's a delight to have you here. It's obvious to anyone paying attention that mothers are essential, and that without mothers pushing us, we just wouldn't get here. And so we're thankful for you. We're thankful for all the input that you give into our life. In fact, I was thinking the other day, what would it be like, for example, if we had a motherless VBS program this summer? We just had no ladies at all. We just all male VBS program. What kind of a disaster would that be? I was thinking, well, you'd show up on Monday and everything would look the same. There would be no decorations whatsoever. There would be no craft day, except you might ask your Uncle Joe to come and do arc welding or something and let the kids watch that. That'd be their craft for the day. Or maybe they'd sort through casings and shells for, reloading later in the day. There wouldn't be any real crafts, anything that makes any sense to kids. There would be no hand motions for any of the songs. We'd still get good songs because Tyler and the band would be there, but there'd be no coordinated hand motions, nothing. All the games would be dangerous. It'd be like, Red Rover, come close line your kid right over. Whatever. Everything would either be dangerous or traumatic, because some engineer would say, we ought to see how far we could catapult hamsters from the top of the C building or something. And the girls, of course, would be terrified watching all the hamsters getting thrown. So I suppose that by halfway through, at least a quarter of the kids would be injured. 20% of the kids would arrive every day with no shoes, having not had any breakfast. And at least 15% of the little girls would have their dresses on backwards, which I never did twice. I just can't imagine that you would have even 40% of the kids that would make it through the whole week. By Friday, when it came to water day, there would be no plan, there'd be no bouncy castles, there'd be nothing fun. They'd just say, turn all the hoses on in the construction zone, watch the trenches and the electrical lines, you'll be fine. Pick up screws and nails, that's your craft for the day. So this just reminded me of how awesome and wonderful mothers are and how essential they are to so many practical things like, food and clothing. I remember being a young father and thinking, if my 3-year-old daughter, Abigail, didn't have her mother, if something happened to Delinda, the clothing thing just would be too much for me. I don't know what I would do. I might make an attempt, and what I would do is go, I know one thing that kids wear when they're little, they're onesies. So I'd probably take her by and get her a onesie, and she'd be like, Dad, it's too small. And I'd be like, well, pretend it's a leotard. It's like you're in tumbling or something. Well, the circulation's being cut off to my toes. Well, that'll be fine. Just shake your leg out. It'll be okay. I probably would say to any lady that would be willing, here's my checkbook. Would you just please go outfit my kids? Because I can't do the shopping thing. So when I think about all the practical ways that mothers really make life good, I think, wow, I'm thankful for moms. But that's not even close to the real reason we're thankful for moms, is it? It's that loving, nurturing, caring, motherly way. And I want to extend that to the ladies that are in this church that have never had a child, maybe have never been married or have never adopted a child, but you consistently love and serve and care for kids in the way that God has uniquely given women to do that, in a very motherly, nurturing way. And you're a huge part of these kids' lives, and I want to wish you as well a happy Mother's Day. We are delighted and just privileged to have you in our life and in these kids' lives. So happy Mother's Day to you. A few months ago, my daughter Rachel, my youngest, said, Dad, if Pastor Scott asks you to preach again someday, I think you should preach on parenting. And I just kind of tucked that one back in the back of my mind. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, Pastor Scott texted me and said, I'm going to be out of town. Would you and your dad be able to take these 2 weeks? And so my dad texts me right away and says, you know what? What do you think about like a marriage and parenting thing? Like you do the parenting one and I'll do the marriage one. I was like, well, okay. I guess the topic is there. I got to go find in the scriptures where might be the most helpful or a unique place to go there. But the message in general or the topic was kind of set for me. So I thought, well, that's great. Now, my father had a little scheduling conflict, so he was going to teach marriage, and then I was going to teach parenting, but we have to swap that. So I'm doing parenting first, he's doing marriage. And just so you know, Jesus prefers you to do it in the opposite order. He likes marriage, then parenting. And so I hope that you'll do it in that order. But ultimately, you're going to get marriage next week from Dad, and today you're going to get a little bit on parenting from me. So, listen, if you're a kid and you're thinking, oh, gee, this is about parenting, I actually want you to listen in and listen up and pay attention, because you're going to hear a little bit this morning about what God teaches your parents to do and why. And maybe that'll help you not only understand a little bit more, but be thankful for the parents that God gave you. Your mom and dad are sinners. They're flawed, just like you are. And so you're going to have to be patient with them, and you're going to have to be thankful for them. That's what you should do. You should obey your parents in the Lord, right? Ephesians 6:18. But kids, listen up, because this one's for you as well. And look, if you're one of these kids in a transitional stage of your life, you're maybe out of the home, or you're about to be out of the home, you're going to college, or you're doing a vocation, you're going right to work or a trade school, whatever it is, you need to pay attention, because you're a lot closer to being married and having kids than you probably think you are. So this is foundational stuff for you. If you're a parent of a young child, you're in the sweet spot. Like, this message is for you. And if you're a parent of an older child, or a few in both spectrums, then I think what you'll have to do is just think through what we're talking about, and then how could I shore up the weaknesses, the areas of my life as a dad, as a mom, that would be helpful, and not be like we just had a revolution in the home and everything's different and all this is topsy-turvy. So you'll have to be a little more thoughtful about how would you want to do that. And if you're courageous enough, you might even ask for some honest feedback from those older kids. What would you say to me as a dad, as a mom? What are the things that I do that encourage you? What are the things that I do that discourage you? How can I be a better mom or dad to you? But ladies, the good news is you're going to get the encouragement, the benefit of the front side of this message. The last third or so of this message gets really direct and really towards the fathers and gets pretty challenging, actually, and difficult. So you're going to get to sit back, enjoy a little bit on Mother's Day. And I just want to encourage you, don't elbow, don't look at them, don't sigh, don't go, yeah, exactly. Just pray. Just pray for them. I think the most significant way you as a wife and a mom can help your family, you can be a helpmate to your husband, is to pray and to pray and to pray. To hold them up before the Lord and say, Lord, you know, and you're able to work in their life in ways that I never will be able to, and so I'm just asking you to help my husband. Help this father be a father that honors you. So, may we all together accept and embrace this obligation, this privilege we have to parent and to influence the lives of these young kids. May we be like Christ, who welcomes all the children to come unto him this morning. Let's pray as we get started. Lord, your word is clear. Your word is a lamp and a light, and it's the anchor that can help us as parents when we feel adrift, when we feel like this is more than we can bear, more than we can handle. It's the thing that we go back to, we hold to, and we say, help us, Lord. Help us to love and embrace and engage and encourage these kids, and may you do your good work in their life. Help us this morning as we endeavor to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. I want you to open your Bibles to Psalm 78 this morning. It's a passage that's going to deal with this topic of parenting, maybe one that you're not familiar with. I would bet that you're familiar with Deuteronomy 6 and some others in the New Testament, but Psalm 78 is a passage I decided to go to because you probably aren't that familiar with it. And I thought, it could be a help to you. This is a psalm of instruction by the worship leader Asaph. And it begins by giving a simple set of commands, telling the people, forming the basis of the teaching, that you're going to call the next generation to hope in God. If you read the rest of the psalm, and this is the second longest psalm in the book of Psalms, if you read the second part of it, you'll see that it recounts all the miraculous works of God, his faithfulness and his goodness to his people, and then the discouraging pattern of sin and problems and rebellion and forgetfulness that the nation had, but then the ever merciful and continually good providence of God that remains faithful to his people despite their unfaithfulness. This morning, we're just going to look at the first 8 verses. I titled the message, Engage, that they might hope. And I want you to think engage the children, the kids, your children, those that you're involved in, that they might hope. Let's read this together. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. My aim this morning is to highlight biblical truth with such clarity that you as parents desire to persistently engage your kids with grace and truth that they might set their hope in God. Let's start by considering verses 1 through 3. Folks, if you're going to engage these kids that they might set their hope in God, you first need to listen carefully, as the psalmist says, because understanding leads to clarity. Listen carefully. Verse 1, give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. This is like a psalmist snapping his fingers. Listen up. He's saying like a coach to a team, listen up. And he wants silence. He wants you to pay attention because he's about to give you a history. He's about to tell you about Israel's history that is filled with tragic consequences and sin. He wants them to know what went wrong and why, and how they might, in fact, become faithful. The parable or the riddle is dark, not that it is evil, but that it has a deep meaning. It's something that's not so easily understood or applied. And if you want to become a wise teacher, you got to pay attention, listen carefully, so that you'll have the ability to communicate those deep things. So what is it that we're teaching that's so deep? Oh, nothing, just the supremacy of God. Just the mighty, glorious wonders of Almighty God. Verse 4, right? We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. So parents, you need to declare the supremacy of God. You need to point the children to the glory, the might, and the wonder of God. It's strange to think, but a lot of people have a very private view of faith and of God. They say, I don't really talk about my faith. I just kind of, it's between me and God. That's a terribly misguided way to live your life. Why in the world would you hide the most glorious, the most powerful, the most beautiful truth in all of reality? You should declare the supremacy of God, not hold back. I mean, look, if you want to join Satan's plan to obscure the truth and make it look like it's not really that relevant, not really that important, then don't tell the kids anything. Just hide it from them. But you ought to tell them over and over and over again the glorious deeds of the Lord, the wonders that he's done. The Bible is filled with thrilling accounts of God's providence, open it up, read it to them, explain it to them, show it to them. Go out and look outside and see what God has done and call their mind and their attention to the glorious wonders and the works of God. I could spend the rest of the time talking about the infinitely glorious, incomparable might, the awe-inspiring wonder of God, what He's done, who He is. And in fact, if you're a Christian one day, you're going to be in the presence of Christ, and you're going to get to explore those three things and all the others for the rest of eternity. That's how good it is. That's how supreme He is. It's going to take an eternity, and you'll never get there. So tell your kids how big, how mighty, how powerful, how beautiful, how creative, how wondrous, how merciful, how loving God is. They cannot hear it too much, and they most certainly cannot see you live it too often. Don't give them a small, insignificant, powerless, tiny view of God. Help them develop a huge view of God, just like the Bible says He is. You want to declare the supremacy of God, all of His character and worth, so that they are stunned by how great God is, and they are drawn powerfully to worship Him. As you declare His supremacy, you'll be testifying to His providence in history as well. Verse 5. You didn't need to know that one yet. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and declare them to their children, so that they may set their hope in God. So parents, teach so they know, that they might set their hope in God. You are the main influencers before their eyes, not only in word but in deed, and your high view of God can result in genuine worship that displays for your kids with like a megaphone that God should be where you place your hope. Your children should desire to pursue God because of the faithful example they see in your life. It should be propelling them to want to pursue God because they see that in mom and dad's life, God is big. You don't want to follow Christ around like a mourner in a funeral that's just like kind of going along, just here because he has to be. You want to be like an obsessive fan who doesn't want to miss any of the delight, any of the joy, any of the hope that God's laid out. You want to be a part of it. You want to be in the middle of it. The truth be told, you cannot teach your kids to follow God with vigor, with vitality, with life, if you yourself are apathetic. In fact, Deuteronomy 6, which you can go ahead and turn to that. I'm going to read to you a few passages in a moment out of there. The Deuteronomy 6 sets the tone for how you're supposed to communicate this and how it'll be effective. Now, Deuteronomy 6 is probably familiar to you. If it's not, I'm going to read it to you here in just a moment. But it's a primary text, a primary place you can go in the Old Testament to see what it is I'm supposed to do as a parent, right? But listen to verse 4 and then especially verse 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Now verse 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in the house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlet between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. But notice the prerequisite. Before he tells you to be diligent in teaching, what does he tell you to do? He tells you to love the Lord your God with all your being, all your heart, all your soul, all your might. If you don't love the Lord in an obvious way that your kids can witness to, can testify, can see, you may as well tell them God doesn't really matter much. That's why he doesn't seem to do anything in my life. You want your kids to see a big view of God, with parents that love their Lord and treasure Him, and the kids are just watching, learning. Listen, they are forming so much of their view of God based upon your life. You got to engage them. You got to stir them up. You got to spur them on. Encourage their pursuit of Christ. Don't make them stumble over your walk with the Lord. Let your walk be the thing that propels them. There is not a prayer I have uttered more in my life than, Lord, save my kids. Let them treasure you more than they treasure anything else in this world. Don't let them be taken by anything. Let their hearts be captured and held by Christ alone. There is nothing worth treasuring more. If your children don't know and don't treasure Christ, let that prayer never cease until they do. Let it be a constant refrain over and over, as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, as people that just love these kids in this church. Call and ask God to save them and teach them and show them why God is so great and so glorious. Then you can agree with the Apostle Paul, who, when referring to his own spiritual children in 3 John, says, I have no greater joy than to see that my children are walking in the truth. So here's how you engage. By God's grace in the life of your kids, you continually declare the glorious, mighty, wondrous works of God and His character. You teach it without ceasing. You do it in your words and in your actions. You find a way to intentionally point them to God. In our family, when we had young children, we discovered something early on, and that was that without exception, every single day of their life, there came a time when we put their pajamas on, they brushed their teeth, and they went to bed. We never missed it, not one time. It happened every single day. And so we said, we could just back up from that time and set some time aside at the end of the day to call them and to say, here's who God is. And so we did a family worship time. We did it almost every night. There were nights that we couldn't. You're out of town, you're on vacation, this and that's happening. But if you were out to dinner with a family and you're driving on the way home, do it in the car. We just wanted to continually call them to set their hope on God, to think of God. And sometimes it was short, and other times it was long and had good discussion. But we wanted to daily call them to consider the goodness and the kindness of God and say, He is where your treasure should be. Now, I realize that every family has different challenges and schedules that are problematic. And so there were times when I was in the military in particular, I was deployed for X amount of time. And so Delinda was doing that mostly, or I might call in on the phone that night and we would talk about what was going on. And I might read something, we'd pray, we'd sing, and that was just our pattern. But even if that's not maybe how your family does it, you need to find a way to intentionally engage your kids, to talk to them often. You need to send them encouraging texts or write them a note or just talk to them and say, tell me what's going on. Tell me what's happening. What do you think about what God's doing right now? What do you think is going on in your life? And just engage these kids. Pray with them. Pray daily and watch to see what God will do in their heart so that they'll set their hope in God. Now, by setting their hope, what I really mean is exercising saving faith. So you got to be praying and asking and teaching, but ultimately what we desire, obviously, is that our kids set their faith, their hope in God, that they exercise saving faith. That's what you're calling them to. That's what you're asking God to do in their life. And then for the rest of their lives, that God would deepen that God would strengthen that, and that they would more and more and more love and trust a sovereign, loving God. That their hope would be continually set on God. Now, why was this so critical in Israel's time, and why is it so critical in yours? Well, verse 8 tells you that they were forgetting the works of God. And you don't want to forget the words of God, but you want to keep His commandments. So that you won't be like your fathers, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. rehearse this gospel truth over and over and over and over in their life and over in your life, so you won't forget the works of God and you will not forsake him, but you will instead keep his word. That, by the way, would help them not waste their life if they remembered the things of God and set their hope and followed. That would keep so much pain and strife out of their life. Kids, listen to me. You are going to be tempted many times over in your life to look at something that's important to you, whether it's money, your career, your schooling, your sports, your friendships, your relationships, whether it's with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your fiance, your husband, your wife someday. Kids, you're going to be constantly tempted to want to exchange your confidence and your hope for God and that thing. Don't do it. Don't ever trade God for anything. There is one place where your hope and your confidence can for sure lie and be anchored for the rest of your life, and that's in Christ. That's the only place your confidence can ultimately be. If you get this right, no matter what else happens in your life, what other chaos comes into your life, that's an anchor you hold to, and you'll make it through that storm. You get this one wrong, and you're signing yourself up for a miserable, difficult life. If you keep putting sports and popularity and beauty and school and all these things in that place, you're signing yourself up for a lot of misery in life. Those will always let you down, and they'll let you down hard. There's only one place where those other little planets can function and operate the way they should. So if you think of food and sports and fame and power and all these things, these are like little planets in your life, right? They're a part of your life. And you need Christ. You need the mass of Christ, the center of your life. The gravitational pull of Christ anchoring it all just keeps the planets in orbit, right? You take Christ out of the center and you put sports or your job or your school or your friends or whatever in the center, the planet's so small it can't hold it. It doesn't have enough gravity. It doesn't have enough anchoring power, and your planets will just fly off into chaos. And that's what will happen with your life. Christ must be the center of your life to anchor everything else. Don't be fooled, kids. Don't ever trade God for anything. He's the only thing that you can anchor yourself to that will never let you down. So parents, we're going to listen, right? We're going to declare, and we're going to teach that they might set their hope in God. Now I'm going to take you to a New Testament passage. And this, ladies, is where you get to listen, benefit, think about how might this be true in my life, but this comes directly at Fathers, because that's what the passage does, and it's Mother's Day, so enjoy and just pray. This is your time to pray for the men in your life, okay? Here's what we need to do, guys. We need to be careful because provoking leads to discouragement. Here's what Colossians 3:21 says. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Ephesians 6:4 says something very similar. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the instruction and admonition of the Lord. To provoke is to agitate, it's to incite. And in this case, it's to make them angry. Angry at maybe your example, maybe the way you talk to them, maybe the way you control them, who knows? But it's provoking them to anger because of something that you're doing. Now, men are more often, not always, but more often, more harsh, more severe, and so we deserve special attention. And Paul does it twice, in Colossians and then in Ephesians. And he says, don't do this in Colossians because it's going to discourage them. Now think about discouragement. Courage is the thing that you want your kids to have, right? Be courageous. Discouragement would be to remove courage. It would be to make them faint of heart. It would be like when you hear somebody say, oh, they're losing heart, or they're losing hope, they're losing confidence. That's what it means to discourage your children. So if you were to summarize Psalm 78, 1 through 8, you might say, engage your children that they might hope in God. But if you read this and you said, well, what is this saying? It might be summarized as saying, be careful, fathers, you might discourage them and cause them to lose hope, cause them to grow faint. Now, dads, if you say, okay, fine, fathers, don't provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Got it. If that's the length of the effort and the thought you've put into it, I highly doubt you will stop provoking your children. This one's going to require you to ask hard, specific questions. How do I provoke my children? What things do I do and say that anger my kids? Now, don't give yourself the pass, because you might be saying, well, they get all emotional, or I'm just confronting them on something, then they blow up, and that's why they're so angry. That's not what I'm talking about. You do have to confront your kids, and you should. You should confront them in a loving and very firm manner in regards to sin. But what I'm talking about is when you're sinning in dealing with their sin. When you're stirring their sin up by sinning while you're trying to deal with their sin. So, you got to ask some hard questions. My mom actually gave me an article that had 25 ways that you provoke children to anger. I'm going to read you the top 5, 6 or so ways from a survey that kids are telling us that, fathers, you're provoking me in these ways especially. Like, you could look at all 25 and say, oh, there's a bunch in there for me, but these are probably the top ones that most of us struggle with. And you just need to listen and ask yourself honestly, where am I on this? The number one by a long shot, dads, pay attention, because this demonstrates whether or not the gospel is actually doing something in your home. Whether it's actually coming out in shoe leather, or whether it's just something you talk about on Sunday and leave. The first one that provokes kids to anger, Dad, is when you do not admit you are wrong and you will not ask for forgiveness. I know a bunch of you, well, I don't know a bunch, a few of you probably had dads and moms, but maybe a lot of dads that they would absolutely never admit they were wrong. They would never ask for forgiveness. Listen, guys, you have to work on this one. This is about the gospel. This is about whether or not you show the gospel is true. And if they could see you exercise humility and say these things and believe these things and behave in this way, it would make an incredible difference in your home. And it would make a difference in the lives of their other relationships, maybe with their siblings and with their friends. These words, I was wrong, I apologize for, and would you please forgive me? Those words I have said to my kids many times. And I've said to them, to my wife, many, many times. If you cannot utter those words, you need to work on this one. You absolutely must learn to utter these words as a believer. You have got to say, the gospel is real. This is what Christ did for me. I had to come to Christ and confess and admit my need, all my sin, and ask for his forgiveness. This is the gospel. You have to work on this one, dads, if you don't do this one. Number 2, modeling sinful anger, especially the silent treatment. Now, modeling sinful anger comes in a lot of forms, right? It's the outbursts, it's the storming off, it's the throwing things, it's the words that, hurt. But one of the most devastating is the silent treatment. You know why? Because what you're saying to a person when you give them the silent treatment, and let me just caveat this by saying, I'm not talking about, I'm angry and I need a few minutes. You should take a few minutes. You should cool down. You should go think about what a good biblical response would be. That is not what I'm talking about. The silent treatment I'm talking about is, I'm so angry at you, I'm not acknowledging you, and I'm not going to talk to you or acknowledge you for whatever length of time I want, the next few hours, the rest of the day, the next couple of days, the next week. Listen, what you're telling somebody when you do that is you don't matter. I am robbing you of your very basic human dignity. I am not willing to acknowledge you as a person, talk to you, and engage with you because I don't like you that much right now. You don't matter. It's worse than physical abuse. And the way you know that is because kids who are abused will go to whatever lengths and act out and get physically abused just so they don't have to be neglected. They would rather have something, even hard, ugly physical abuse, than to just be told in so many non-words, you don't matter. I'm pushing you off to the side. Dads, listen to me. This can have some really devastating effects. Do not give your kids the silent treatment. Don't give your wife the silent treatment. Don't give your friends the silent treatment. Go take a moment and ask God to help you, but then engage them. Don't ignore them. Number 3, not listening to your child's opinion or taking his or her side of the story seriously. Now, dads, this is another area that we often struggle. It's hard to listen. We start to hear the story and we just go, okay, I got it. I got it. Let me tell you. That never turns out well. I mean, I can tell you of all the tons of times that I've had this kind of scenario, the times when I've taken the moment to listen, to try to understand, to put myself all the way in their shoes, and then make a response, that attempt almost always works out really well. But as soon as I just try to run in there and just tell them I got it, or make a bunch of assumptions, it ends really poorly. It ends with me later having to go back to number 1, say I was wrong, I apologize, would you forgive me for this? Because I've sinned against them by just ramrodding and running over them, right? So this is an essential skill, guys. You got to learn how to do it. You have to learn how to listen. You have to sit down and listen. Chuck Swindoll shared a story recently about Proverbs 22:6 and training up a child. You've heard that verse, train up the child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. And Chuck was saying, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that because a lot of people think train up the child in the way he should go means there's one way to do it that way, and the kid will be good. The reality is, derek, that Hebrew word, which I don't know Hebrew, but Chuck does, derek means the way, and the way is said in other parts of Proverbs to be the way of a serpent on a rock, or the way of an eagle in flight, or the way of a ship at sea. Things that are different and capture your attention. So here's how it relates. You look at a child and you go, this child is their personality, their demeanor, the way they handle stress, the way they handle this, it is so different than this child. So when this happens in their life, I got to sit down and talk with this child for the next hour and just work with them, work through them. Because there's a way for me to communicate wisdom and truth, and I got to listen, and then I need to impart wisdom and truth. And it's got to be done in this way. This kid over here, totally different. We're going to go out and we're going to bounce around in the four-wheeler, and we're going to talk through a few things and going to ask him how he's doing, and it's going to be a shorter conversation. Or, you know what I mean. You cannot go in the same exact direction with every child and expect that they'll just get it. The truths are the same, but the way and the manner in which you do it is not. Each child is different, and you need to train them up in their way. That's what the idea is of Derek, is in their way. The way that God's designed them. How do you now impart wisdom and truth to that kid's life? Dads, don't back away when things look messy. Lean in and listen. Then take some time to impart wisdom when they can hear it. Sometimes that means like, I'll just listen, and maybe tomorrow or maybe tonight later we'll talk after you've thought through all the stuff you just said. Maybe some of this will be self-correcting, right? But listen first, listen hard, then address the root issues that you see. This takes a lot of work. You just need to know it as a dad. You already do. But if you're really going to get after this and you're really going to engage, you're signing yourself up for a lot of work. And it is work you should absolutely sign yourself up for. I want you to be great at what you do, whatever it is that you do, but I want you to be outstanding as a dad. I used to say to folks when I was leaving the Air Force is going to leave, they're going to miss me for at least 15 minutes. My family, I'm going to impact those kids and my wife the rest of their life, and it'll spill over into their kids' lives. And so that's where my effort is really going to be at the end of the day. I want to be great at what I do, but I want to be outstanding at this one. Here's another one. Oh, one more just thought there. Would someone believes that you've really listened to them, when you've actually made the effort to listen, they are far more likely to now hear and listen to your wisdom and instruction. It's just human nature. When they know you love and care for them, you listen to them, they're like, okay, now tell me, right? But you ramrod them or go in front and just try to jam it down their throat when they don't feel listened to or heard, and they can't get it. Number 4, chastening or disciplining in front of others. This is a dignity issue. You just discipline those kids and embarrass them in front of their friends, in front of their extended family, in front of their immediate family, whatever. You're taking a little piece of their dignity when you do that. You ought to say, hey, come here. Let's go talk. Or if they're little, you say, go to your room. Dad's going to be there in a few minutes. You go to your room. But you don't unload on them in front of people. I mean, do you like it when you're in the office and your boss comes in and just embarrasses you in front of everybody? Way to go, you really screwed this one up, you dingleberry. What are you doing? Nobody wants that. Nobody likes that. That is incredibly discouraging. But if your boss pulls you into his office and goes, hey, listen, there's some things I need you to shore up here, okay? We got to fix this one, okay? You can do it. I know you can. Now you're like, okay, I'll get after it, right? Don't discipline in front of others. Number 5, there's one more that was tied to that is habitually disciplining in anger. If you're constantly angry when you discipline, that is incredibly discouraging to a child. That's why take a moment, gather your thoughts, think about what's a good response here, then go and deal with the child. But number 5 is one you need to pay attention to as well, a lack of marital harmony. Deep insecurity comes to a child that consistently witnesses marital unhappiness. This is the most important human relationship that they observe. And so your witness of what Christ and the church should look like may really make them question both Christ and the church. And so you need to really think through what's going on at home. And you need to be a big enough man and a strong enough man and a humble enough man to say, we've got some problems and we're going to have to look at them and deal with them. Marriage is supposed to be the picture of Christ and the church, a committed, beautiful, harmonious relationship. And of course, in this world where we got sin that tears everything up, you expect that there's sin and issues of disharmony from time to time, but then you address those. You even come to your kids and say, you know what, kids? I want to apologize for the way Mom and I have been just going at each other. It's wrong. It's sinful. And we would like your forgiveness for that. That is not what this marriage should look like. That is not what Christ and the church should look like. Moms and dads, they know you're sinners. They see it all the time. The question is, are you willing to deal with your issues, to let the Spirit work on your heart? Or are you just going to go to your corners and lob accusations at each other? The hardest thing in marital counseling is getting both persons to stop pointing at each other all the time. It's like all they can see is their issues, right? They need to see their issue. They need to see, like Paul says, I'm the chief of sinners. I'm the one who has so many issues. I don't have time enough to deal with yours. I need to deal with mine. I got to look at my own sin, examine my own heart, and see what God would call me to do. Because as soon as you do that and you get humble, then the other person will often respond in humility, and you'll meet down here where you need to be, at the foot of the cross, admitting once again, we need you, Lord. Well, there's more. Constantly finding fault, comparing them to others. I mean, look, if Colossians 3:21 says, fathers, don't provoke your children lest they become discouraged, is there anything more discouraging than being constantly told you have problems, like you're constantly at fault of something? Or constantly being compared? And the comparing is not like, oh, you're doing so great. It's usually like, why are you not doing so well? Why can't you do this? Why are you always this way? They're not that way. That's just discouraging, right? So don't do that. Don't compare them to their siblings. Don't constantly find fault. Find ways to encourage your children and to say, you know what? I'm proud of that. You know, you did a good job there. I appreciate your effort. Thank you for being kind to your sister. So that when you do need to come to them and say, listen, there's something here, though, that we need to talk about, that's not the only thing they ever hear from you, right? If you're spurring them on and encouraging them as a parent, then they'll be able to receive that more difficult instruction when it comes. So, a thought. What do you do when inevitably, fathers, mothers, you do discourage them, you do provoke them? What do? You go back to number one. You say, I was wrong. I was angry, I was short, I was unfair to you. That was wrong of me. Would you forgive me? That's what you do. You'll be a much better man if you'll show how the gospel works in your family. You'll be a much better man, and you'll have a much bigger impact. Let me put a bow tie on this and give you a few thoughts. Engage with your kids, number one, by declaring God's supremacy in all things, that they might set their hope in God. That's the big picture, parents. Engage them and just keep declaring and calling them to set their hope in God. Stay engaged with them, number two, because their life's going to get messy. Don't back away. I mean, it's tempting as a dad, maybe some teenage girls that get a little emotional and challenging and you don't quite know what to do with them, and so you're kind of like, oh, I don't know, I'll just back away from this one. Don't do that, dads. Like, lean in and say, oh, hey, come on, honey, let's talk about this. Dad wants to hear. I need to try to understand. I want to help you. Point them to Christ. Point them away from all the idols the world draws them to. Point them to Christ and say, love God. And watch me as I love God and I love people. I want to be an example to you. Third, be careful to avoid discouraging them by provoking their anger. Your job is to encourage them and spur them on, not discourage them. So be careful, dads. Be careful. I want you one day, I want me, I want all of us one day to be able to say, I have no greater joy than to see that my children are walking in the truth. Now, I got one final paragraph, and it's for the men. And this is what I call hard, severe encouragement. This is a take the pain and like it kind of paragraph. I want you to listen. I want you to ask yourself, where am I here? The only way you dads, the only way I am going to actually be able to point them and declare and have a consistent, faithful walk and not be discouraging them through all these ways that we provoke, the only way that that's going to kind of be able to happen in my life, in your life, is if we get over ourselves. Guys, you need to get over yourself. You are not the most important person in the room. You're just not. Neither am I. Biblically speaking, you are a steward of the resources God has given you, and you are a shepherd to the people that live in your home. We don't own them. We shouldn't control them. We should serve them. That's our call, to love and serve them. We're to lay our lives down for them. We are to engage them and spend ourselves for their benefit. God gave you broad shoulders to handle more responsibility, not less. You should be bearing more of the cost in leading, not less. You should be the hardest working, the greatest servants in the home. But we have a tendency to do more dictating and controlling and less dying and serving. That's what you're supposed to be doing. Come on, men, wake up. Get a strong biblical view of manhood. Don't watch your wife who's just doing all the parenting and say, yeah, whatever's fine with me. Get in there, get engaged, lead the parenting with humility and grace. Bear the most load, talk more often, get messy, be gentle, be approachable. And when you mess up, go to them and confess it and ask for their forgiveness. Get out of your comfortable chair, your comfortable life, and get engaged. Go to work for your family so they know you love them and you're doing it for their good and God's glory. You will be a you will be a bigger man. Oh, that was a terrible slip. Can you erase that and back up? You will be a better man with a bigger impact if you will do that. Let's pray. Lord, help us men. We need help. We need humility. We need to take an honest look at ourselves and get over ourselves. We need to go to like Philippians 2, 3, and 4 and say, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Lord, would you break through the egos and the lack of confidence and the I don't know what to do and all the ways that men sometimes just give over, and would you help them to engage? Would you help the wives to pray, to love, to encourage, to help shape their kids by just asking God to work on the dads and the kids. And may these kids hear and be stunned and be fully committed to treasuring Christ and forsaking all the things that this world has to offer and just letting Christ reign at the center of their life. Would you do this for your glory and our good? In the precious name of Christ I pray. Amen. You are dismissed. Happy Mother's Day.